The Huawei P9 was the first smartphone to truly pioneer the dual camera setup on smartphones, and now 2 years later we have the P20 Pro bringing us the world's first triple camera system on a smartphone. However, simply having more cameras doesn't make a smartphone better at its camera game. Like the P9, its implementation and optimization is what counts. This is Sandeep from RevAtlas. Let's take a look at the camera setup on the P20 Pro. Let's talk hardware first, and there's quite a bit of it. 3 cameras, 2 of which are housed within a single island. The topmost or rightmost, depending on how you hold the phone, houses the 8MP camera with f2.4 aperture, while below it is the 40MP f1.8 sensor with 27mm focal length and 1 by 1.7 inch sensor size, which is the biggest sensor in the current crop of flagships. The sensor that stands solo is a 20MP monochrome sensor with f1.6 aperture and an identical focal length to the primary camera. Telephoto camera offers 3x optical zoom as opposed to the 2x optical zoom offered by other smartphones and flagships. All the lenses are also with Leica branded optics. The primary sensor is optically stabilized, but we have also seen some other reports suggest that the other 2 sensors are optically stabilized as well. Regardless of that, let's go ahead and take a look at how they actually perform. The P20 Pro captures photos either in full 40MP or in 10MP resolution, which is the default resolution. It uses pixel binning to combine information from 4 pixels into one single one to get a much sharper and clearer image. As a result, it's probably best to stick to 10MP as the resulting file sizes are smaller and you get better detailing as well. The dynamic range is excellent considering the sensor is one of the biggest currently, and on top of that the phone also gets information from the monochrome sensor to produce some great looking images. Another reason is thanks to the great white balancing, which is due to the color temperature sensor that's present beside the LED flash unit. Focusing is also extremely fast and quite complicated as it uses depth information from 3 cameras along with phase detection autofocus, contrast detection and laser autofocus to achieve what they call 4D predictive focus. The name might sound cheesy, but it works extremely well. The HDR mode works really well under low light, but you may find it quite similar to what you would get from the regular mode itself in well-lit conditions since the dynamic range is great by default. The AI mode also works in HDR at times if it thinks that you could benefit from HDR in a particular scenario. AI is being given a great importance, and rightly so. It definitely is a huge step forward in terms of photography, and over the coming years, it can evolve even further to assist us a lot with the camera. It's still in its initial stages currently, but can still be very useful for an average consumer. Currently, the AI mode is able to detect what you're capturing, be it food, greenery, sunset, dogs, stage performance and much more. Not only does it detect these things, but it also applies processing that it thinks is apt for the same. For example, when it detects that you are having a person in front of the frame and he or she is occupying most of it, it automatically turns on the portrait mode and applies a background blur as well as other tweaks. You can still do the portrait mode by yourself, but this does it automatically. An average user would probably like to leave it enabled all the time and let the camera do the thinking rather than do it themselves. In many instances, it does give great results that are often better than without the AI feature turned on, but in some situations it does go a bit overboard and looks worse than without AI. We found the AI to be a bit harsh when it detects greenery and sky, but when you're photographing food or stage performances etc., the AI did a really great job. What the P20 Pro probably does best and puts it miles ahead of any other smartphone on the market is low-light performance. If you have tried a Google Pixel smartphone, you'd already know how good the low-light performance is on it. However, if you compare the photos taken with the P20 Pro to the Pixel 2 XL for example, the Pixel would look like a mid-ranger under low light. The larger sensor definitely helps, and the monochrome sensor with larger aperture aids in bringing more information in without increasing noise. And to top it all off, there's even a night mode on the P20 Pro which stacks images one on top of another to create some stunning low light photos that provide the most accurate white balance and colors that we have seen. It can take photos up to 6 seconds handheld using clever EIS and OIS. The results are really impressive and is something you'd normally be able to achieve only with a tripod on other smartphones or even high-end cameras. You don't need to use night mode all the time, and in many cases the camera itself produces some stunning low light photos with the master AI or using the HDR mode, but in some cases the night mode takes it that one extra step further. Having a dedicated monochrome camera allows you to capture monochrome photos in much better tonality and quality than an RGB converted to black and white. The contrast is much higher and the skin tones, especially when capturing portraits, really stand out. It also does better when it comes to low light photos since the color noise is much lesser. There's a portrait mode on board, but it's quite subtle. The blurring algorithm is good, but if you want more control over the images and the blurring, you'd be better off using the aperture mode, which allows you to control the aperture and mimic effects that you would get from a variable aperture camera. You can choose between f.95 to f16 and you would get a corresponding shallow or deep depth of field. f.95 is at times a bit too much, and you found the sweet spot to be between f2.4 and f4 most of the time. The other benefit of aperture mode is that you can choose to change your point of focus and even change the aperture value after the image has been captured. You can do portrait mode in either 1x or 3x zoom levels, but wide aperture mode is restricted only to the primary camera at 1x zoom. The telephoto camera gives you 3x zoom from its 8MP camera, but the resulting photos are actually 10MP in terms of resolution. This is because it actually works in tandem with the primary 40MP sensor to produce images. In fact, one of the best things about the 3x zoom is the stability. We're not quite sure how Huawei has managed to do it, but once you switch the viewfinder to 3x zoom and give it a moment, you'll see the stabilization kick in and it feels like the phone is on some sort of gimbal. You have to have really shaky hands to capture a blurry photo with this, as it is more stable than the OIS enabled iPhone X and Galaxy flagship smartphones, despite having 2x telephoto zoom as compared to a 3x on this one. But the most important part of the zoom range is perhaps the fact that you can take photos even at 5x zoom and 10x zoom and they'll end up being pretty useful. Take these photos for example, you'll know that there's a lot of optimization going on internally, since you get a grainy and blurry image in the viewfinder when you hit the 5x or 10x zoom buttons. But in a moment or so, it automatically optimizes everything and you get a really usable photo. In this scenario, I spotted an airplane with my naked eye in the distance. I took a photo with the primary sensor and I zoomed in all the way to 10x and shot another one. Although it's not really ideal, you can see the airplane. You won't be able to see it in the 10MP or 40MP sample even when you zoom in it, but it's visible at the 10x zoom level. No other phone on the market can do this. It's just astonishing. The front-facing camera is a 24MP f2 unit that Huawei and Honor seems to be sharing across the board in smartphones such as the P20 Lite, P20 and Honor 10. It doesn't have autofocus, so you'll need to get the focusing distance right or else risk getting a not so sharp image. It does have high resolution, but the details and sharpness aren't as pronounced as what you would expect from a 24MP camera. It's not bad, but it's not the best either. The portrait mode up front is a bit stronger as you don't have an aperture mode here. The blurring algorithm is very good and edge detection is one of the best we have seen as well. Video recording goes all the way up to 4K at 30fps, but you may want to focus on the 1080p 30fps bit considering it gives you EIS. It seems that 4K does have stabilization, but perhaps just OIS. You get some sort of a jello effect if you pan or jerk the camera when recording, as you can probably see looking at the trees in this sample. However, the 1080p footage is extremely stable and doesn't seem to have the same jello effect that plagues the higher resolution footage. There's not a whole lot of difference when it comes to detailing on 4K and 1080p videos. Both are good when it comes to colors, detail and white balance. The stabilization is perhaps one of the most impressive ones we've ever seen on a smartphone, and it's really hard to get a shake on it. You can even choose to go for an H.264 file format or an H.265 format, the latter of which is more efficient and will give you file sizes that are roughly half the size but with the same level of quality. The front-facing camera can do 1080p with EIS as well, but we got some jittery videos at times like this one, but at other times it did feel quite smooth.
Support 1080p video even with the front camera, so that's a bit of a letdown, but let me know what you guys think about the overall sharpness, the image quality, the dynamic range, and even how well it's picking up my voice even though we're actually in the busy city inside a park.
There's super slow motion on board and you can record 960 frames per second at 720p, but it isn't as clever as the one you would find on the Galaxy S9. You just hit record, it captures, and you're left with a few seconds of ultra slow motion in between and a few seconds of regular speed clips before and after. It can also do 720p 240fps regular slow motion and 1080p slow motion at 120fps. The P20 Pro is a definite stunner for a smartphone when it comes to a camera. I actually replaced my Pixel 2 XL with it, and while the Pixel 2 XL is a bit easier to use and perhaps the portrait mode is a bit better, I have to say that I'm loving the P20 Pro camera. Its camera challenges you and provides more versatility than Pixel setup could ever provide. If you're really enthusiastic about photography, then this is one smartphone that'll make you smile again and reignite your passion for smartphone photography. Thanks for watching, see you again in the next one. आपके पुराने फ़ोन की अच्छी कीमत पाइए Cashify.in पे। Cashify देता है फ्री पिकअप, इंस्टेंट कोड और हैसल फ्री पेमेंट। लिंक चेक करें वीडियो के डिस्क्रिप्शन में।